Now it's your turn. Are you going to repeat the mistake of the history?
It's 10 a.m. approximately on September 15th, 2008. In the geniuses, all the brilliant people we hear so much about, the party of Davos, the city of London, Wall Street, all of these geniuses have decided the United States government, for a host of reasons, they're going to kick Lehman Brothers into bankruptcy. The smartest guys in the room didn't understand something, that putting into bankruptcy, not understanding how Lehman Brothers was so central to the world's capital markets, would start a string of events that would ultimately lead to the election of Donald J. Trump as 45th President of the United States. 3 days later, on the 18th, Secretary of the Treasury Hank Paulson, former chairman of Goldman Sachs, a guy I used to work for as a young investment banker, and Ben Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, went to the Oval Office, told George Bush, we need $1 trillion in cash, and we need it by 5 o'clock today, or the American financial system is going to implode. George Bush took a very courageous act. He says, hey, the White House counsels looked at the Constitution. I don't think I can solve this. You have to go to Capitol Hill. So they went up and saw Nancy Pelosi and the leaders of the House and the Senate, and they made a plea. We know this later from public records and the investigations that took place of how we had the worst financial meltdown in the history of mankind. We know that they said we need $1 trillion. In the American financial system, if we don't get it, we'll melt down in 72 hours. And the world's financial system will implode in 2 weeks, and we will have global anarchy. Now, the elites of the city of London and Frankfurt and Wall Street and Tokyo brought that crisis on. They did something to the West and to the United States in particular that our worst enemies hadn't done. Kaiser Wilhelm, the military junta in Japan, Mussolini, Hitler, Mao Zedong, the Bolsheviks, the communists. By our own hand, we virtually destroyed ourselves. Now, what's good to know is that the elites, the globalists, they took a very courageous move. You know what they did? They saved themselves. They saved themselves and let the little guy pay for it. They saved themselves and let the devil catch the hindmost. Bush, Paulson, Bernanke, and later the most progressive Democratic president in the history of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama, took the Federal Reserve's balance sheet from $880 billion to $4.5 trillion. The 10-year anniversary is coming up in September. And if you've owned intellectual property, if you've owned assets, if you own real estate, you own stocks, you've had the greatest 10-year run in history. You think these hedge fund guys are so rich because they're smart? They inflated their way out of here. And you know who paid for it? People making $45,000 a year. People that have not had a wage increase since 1970. The concentration of wealth in America in the West is obscene. It's an obscenity. And I don't want to hear all the progressive left chatter and all this talk. The Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, is bought and paid for by Wall Street. And you need no other evidence than how they bailed themselves out. In the United States, you have socialism for the very poor and for the very wealthy. And you have a brutal form of capitalism for everybody else. That incident in 2008 lit the match of the great revolt that we've seen across the industrial West, ending with the election of Donald Trump. In 2010, the reaction to this caused the rise of the Tea Party. Remember the Tea Party? That was kind of a populist self-organizing mechanism. It won, with no money, it won 62 seats or 63 seats in the 2010 election, the biggest victory in the House of Representatives since the Great Depression. Later, Mitt Romney did not reach out to the Tea Party. Mitt Romney wanted nothing to do with the populist movement or the working class in the Republican Party. And Mitt Romney, who was so sure they were going to win, Paul Singer and the Kochs, all of them up there at the Ritz Hotel in Boston on election night, were absolutely gobsmacked when they lost to President Obama, and lost badly to President Obama. And the solution for that, the Republican Party put out an autopsy. The solution for that was going to be open borders and amnesty that they had not played to the Hispanic members of the United States population. But there was another set of data by a guy named Sean Trendy of Real Clear Politics. And in 2013, I sat down with Jeff Sessions at the Breitbart embassy, and we kind of walked through a potential battle plan. And what it showed is that working class people, blacks, Hispanics, and whites, had not shown up for Mitt Romney because he represented Wall Street. He did not speak to their needs. The economic conditions for the working class were getting worse. Do you know today in the United States of America, when we had these hurricanes that hit last year, 50% of the families in our country don't have $400 in cash for an emergency. I think the average net worth in our country is $10,000, right? If you back out the home equity in your house. Whereas the concentration of wealth, the top 1% own today 44% of the wealth. And I think the top 10% own 98% of the wealth. There's something like 160 million families that literally have, 160 million people that have no cash in the bank. The people at Walmart will tell you that the bulk of the working class live paycheck to paycheck. Well, I got news for you. The bulk of the middle class live paycheck to paycheck. People with middle class salaries are 1 or 2 paychecks away from oblivion. How did we get here? We got here because we've allowed a global elite to call the shots, and that's the backbone of the populist movement. In 2014, we had another surge election based upon the same principles of populism. The Republicans picked up more votes. We had an eye-opener. I personally had an eye-opener as I watched a more professional version of the Tea Party in England, led by Nigel Farage. In the European elections in May of 2014, I saw a party of populism pick up seats in the European Parliament and saw the techniques that they used to excite people. And I realized that in Europe, the populist movement was ahead of the United States. In 2015, Donald Trump comes down the escalator. He was number 7 at the top of the escalator, but that evening he was number 1. Because besides what Lanny talks about in his 1 hour and 15-minute speech that kicked him off as a candidate, he talked about things that no one had talked about things that Senator Sessions and I talked about. Number 1, take trade from number 100 as an issue and bring it down to number 2. Take immigration as number 3 or 4 and bring it to number 1. Because trade and illegal immigration are 2 sides of the same coin. Trade is just unfair competition from for your skilled workers by cheaper manufacturing, lower wages, and inhumane conditions in other countries. And illegal immigration, mass illegal immigration, is an unlimited pool of labor to compete against black and Hispanic working class. And with those 2 issues that Republicans have never talked about, because the high church theology of the Republican Party is free trade, free trade, free trade. A radical idea that nobody has ever fully implemented except the United States against a mercantilist rival that we'll get to in a second. Also in 2015, with the rise of Donald Trump, the arrogance of one of the most destructive politicians in the 21st century, Angela Merkel of Germany, decides on her own to allow 2 million Syrian refugees or migrants into Europe. A event that they admit today was very stupid. In 2016, We had Brexit. And all the great geniuses and all the media in the United States on the night of Brexit, we had a crew over the night of Brexit. CNN had so little understanding of the issues, so little understanding of where the British people were, that they had to get on TV and to get people that were calling him Nigel Farage. They had no concept of what was going on. In fact, a small anecdote, Nigel actually conceded after a couple of beers, or early in the morning, they had a flashing that Nigel had conceded. We called Nigel and talked to Raheem Bassam and said, chill out.